The distance between us, a story of two people in the same marriage watching each other from different windows. The perfect life is an illusion. The terrifying thing is not discovering that. The terrifying thing is discovering it while you're building a case against the person who figured it out first. Part 1, The Neighborhood. We lived on Bancroft Street in the Selwood neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, in a house that we had spent 4 years making look like the life we intended to have. I want to be specific about this. The house was real. The white Craftsman with the covered porch and the rhododendrons and the deep backyard that ran down to a small creek, this was all real. The Sunday morning coffee on the porch when the weather permitted. The neighborhood farmers market on Saturdays where we bought too many vegetables and actually ate most of them. The neighbors who waved from driveways and whose names we knew and who knew ours. All of this was real. What I am less certain about now is the word intended. When Diana and I bought the house on Bancroft Street 6 years ago, I believe we were building a shared life. What I understand now from the distance of everything that happened is that we were both building the life we each believed we shared. And these were not in a number of significant respects the same life. My name is Adam Carver. I am 41 years old. I work remotely as a senior product manager for a software company headquartered in San Francisco, which means I spend approximately 40 hours per week in the home office at the back of the Bancroft Street house, managing a team I have never met in person, and shipping features for products I use infrequently myself. It is not an exciting description of a professional life, it is accurate. Diana Carver Ney Reyes. 38 years old, an emergency room nurse at OHSU who worked rotating shifts, 3 days on 4 off or 4 on 3 off the schedule, cycling in ways that I had been tracking for 6 years and had never fully internalized. She was excellent at her work in the specific way that people are excellent at difficult work, not through the absence of stress, but through the conversion of stress into precision. She was the person in the room who was calm when calmness was most required, and she brought this same quality home, which meant that when the calmness cracked, which it did, increasingly in the months before I noticed the other things, I noticed it immediately. The house next door had been vacant for 5 months when Nora moved in. This was October. Nora Voss, 32, recently relocated from Seattle, some kind of consulting work that she described vaguely when we met over the low fence between our yards on her second day of residency. She had an easy directness and a laugh that came quickly, and the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had been moving through the world alone long enough to be comfortable in it. Diana and I had her over for dinner 2 weeks after she moved in, and the three of us talked for 4 hours at the kitchen table, and I went to bed thinking I like her. She's good company. This will be a good neighborly friendship. I was not wrong about any of this. I was also missing things which would become apparent later. What I am going to tell you is the complete version, not the version I was telling myself while it was happening, which was shaped by fear and assumption, and the specific distortions of a person who has started gathering evidence for a conclusion they have already reached. The complete version, which I assembled gradually and painfully over the months that followed the night everything broke open, is considerably more complicated and considerably more honest. It starts with a phone. Part 2, the phone. Diana had always been open about her phone, not performatively open, not the specific demonstrative transparency of someone who wants you to know they're not hiding anything, just naturally open in the way of a person who has nothing to hide and therefore does not think about hiding. In January, this changed. The change was small at first. The screen down habit her phone placed face down on the kitchen counter when she was cooking when she had always left it face up. The pocket habit her phone going into the pocket of her scrubs or her cardigan rather than left on the couch cushion beside her when she sat down to watch something. The bathroom habit. Taking the phone with her when she got up in the middle of the night, which she had never done before. I noticed these things the way I notice things systematically without immediately concluding anything, storing the observations in the mental file that I keep for information I don't yet know what to do with. I am a product manager. I am trained to recognize patterns in user behavior. I did not set out to apply this training to my wife. It happened anyway. February brought something else, a mood shift that I could not account for by any of the usual explanations. Diana had always had a specific quality of presence when she came home from a difficult shift at the ER, a quietness that was not withdrawal but decompression. The specific unwinding of a person who had been holding a great deal together for 12 hours and needed to put it down. I knew this quietness. I had learned it over 6 years of her work schedule. This was different. This was a quietness with a specific quality of attention to it. She was quiet, but she was also paradoxically alert, present in the room in a way that felt watchful rather than restful. She was watching me in the way that you watch someone when you are wondering what they are doing when you are not watching them. I did not know why she would be watching me this way. I told myself she was having a difficult period at work. I told myself the rotating schedule was hard and the winter in Portland was long, and we were both tired, and the distance between us was the natural accumulation of two people who worked hard and kept different hours and had not been intentional enough about prioritizing their connection. I told myself these things because they were available and because the alternative was a question I was not ready to ask. In March, the trips to Nora's house started. Part 3. Nora. Diana had been going to Nora's house regularly since November. I knew this. She had told me casually that she and Nora had been spending time together watching shows on Nora's larger television, having wine and conversation on Nora's heated back porch. I had thought nothing of this. I was glad Diana had found a friend in the neighborhood. After 6 years of me mostly working from home and Diana keeping the odd-hour schedule of a hospital shift worker, the social geography of our lives had become somewhat contracted, and I had thought Nora's arrival was good for Diana in the specific way that proximity to an energetic and interesting person can be good for someone who has been operating in a smaller orbit. What changed in March was the quality of the trips. They had been casual before. Diana would mention she was heading over. She would come back after an hour or two in the easy way of someone who had spent an uncomplicated evening with a neighbor. Beginning in late February and becoming more consistent in March, the trips changed character. She left later after 9, sometimes after 10. She came home quieter than usual. She stopped mentioning them in advance, and sometimes did not mention them at all. When I noted once that she had been at Nora's late, she said yes and went to brush her teeth, and the conversation ended. The night in late March was when I crossed the line I had been standing at for 2 months. Diana had gone to bed, or said she was going to bed. I was in the back office finishing something, as I often was, and I came out an hour later to find the bedroom empty. The house was quiet. I went to the front window and looked out at the street, and her car was in the driveway and the lights at Nora's house were on. I put on my shoes and a jacket and went outside. I am going to tell you what I was thinking as I did this, because what I was thinking matters to the story. I was thinking I need to know, not what my wife is doing exactly. I don't think I had fully formed that question yet. I was thinking I need to know what I can't see from here. The feeling was not primarily jealousy. It was the specific disorientation of a person who has been living inside a picture and has begun to suspect that the picture is different from the outside. I positioned myself at the side of Nora's house, near the fence that separated our properties, where I could hear voices from the back porch through the wooden slats. I am not proud of this. I am telling it because it is what happened. 2 voices, Diana's and one I didn't recognize. A man's voice. Diana was speaking in a low, urgent tone. "He's starting to notice," she said. "I can tell. He's been different since February." The man said something I couldn't make out. Diana said, "We can't do this much longer. If he finds out before we're ready, it's over." I stood at the fence in the Portland March dark, and those sentences landed in me and arranged themselves into a single clear conclusion. My wife was having an affair. She was meeting her lover at our neighbor's house. The man whose voice I didn't recognize was the man she was seeing, and they were managing the timing of my discovery. I walked back to the house. I went to bed. I lay there for 4 hours and did not sleep. I was completely wrong about what I had heard, but I would not know that for another 2 months. Part 4. Isabel. I need to tell you about Isabel, because the story is not honest without her, and I am trying to tell the honest version. Isabel parked working with me at the software company. She was 35, a senior designer whose team worked closely with mine on product development. We had been collaborating for 2 years. She was sharp and direct and had a specific quality of humor that I found consistently genuine, rather than perform the humor of a person who was actually funny rather than a person who was trying to be. In January, around the same time that Diana's phone behavior started changing, Isabel and I began a new phase of collaboration on a major product cycle that required daily contact. The daily contact became natural. The daily contact became something I look forward to in the specific way that you look forward to the parts of your day that feel uncomplicated. I want to be very precise about what was happening and what was not happening, because the precision matters. Isabel and I were not having a physical affair. We were remote colleagues who communicated primarily through Slack and video calls. What we were doing was developing the kind of daily intimacy that remote work creates when 2 compatible people spend hours in regular communication without the social friction of physical space. By February, our conversations had started extending past the formal work context. By March, I was telling Isabel things about my marriage that I had not said out loud to anyone. Not dramatic things, not accusations about Diana's behavior, which I was still, at that point, telling myself I was misreading. Just the ordinary accumulation of small disclosures that happen when you are looking for a place to put things you are carrying and someone available and interested presents themselves. I did not tell Diana about these conversations. Not because I had anything to hide, I told myself. Because there was nothing to tell, I told myself. I was lying to myself. This is what I understand now. The conversations with Isabel were not an affair, but they were filling a space that belonged to my marriage. And the reason that space was available to be filled was that I had not been offering Diana access to it. I had been, in the specific way that people are unfaithful before they are unfaithful, directing my attention and my emotional availability towards someone who was not my wife. Diana knew. I would find out eventually that she had known since February, which is when the phone behavior started. She had not known about Isabel specifically, not then. She had known that something in my attention had shifted, and she had felt the shift, and she had been trying to understand what it was. She had hired someone to help her understand. Part 5, the camera. I installed the camera in early April. I am not going to spend a long time on the justification because the justification was inadequate, and I knew it even at the time. What I will tell you is the sequence I was afraid of, what I didn't know, I believed that knowing would be better than not knowing. And I told myself that installing a camera in my own house was within the acceptable range of behavior for a person who had reason to believe they were being deceived. All of these things were rationalizations. The real reason I installed the camera was that I had been gathering a case against Diana for 6 weeks. The way people gather cases when they have already decided, the verdict and the camera felt like the next logical step in the gathering. I positioned it in the living room angle, covering the front door and the main couch area. Small enough to be invisible. I told myself I would watch only if Diana gave me specific new reason. Then I watched immediately. The first 3 weeks of footage showed Diana coming and going at her usual times, cooking dinner, watching television, having the ordinary life of our house. I watched her in footage the way you watch someone you are afraid of losing, with the specific attention of a person who has not yet lost something, but is beginning to understand that they might. On a Tuesday in mid-April, she came home from a day shift, changed her clothes, and left again at 8 in the evening without telling me she was going out. I had been in the office headphones on and emerged to an empty house. I watched the footage she had come in, moved quietly through the house. Specifically, I noticed she had not come to the office door to say she was home, which she normally did, changed, checked her phone for several minutes with an expression I could not fully read and left. I followed her. She drove to a coffee shop on Division Street, not to Nora's house. This surprised me. I parked down the block and watched through the window. She was at a corner table and she was not alone. The man across from her was perhaps 50, professional looking, with a legal pad on the table and his own laptop. They talked for 90 minutes. Diana showed him something on her phone, photographs it looked like. He made notes. She had a file folder that she had brought from the car and she went through several pages with him. It did not look like a romantic meeting. It looked exactly like what it was, which is what I would eventually understand a meeting with a private investigator. But I did not understand that yet. I drove home and sat in the dark office and added what I had seen to the case I was building, in which the man with the legal pad was a detail I could not yet explain, and therefore chose to file as suspicious. Part 6, Nora's real role. I found out about Nora's real role in stages over the 2 weeks following the coffee shop surveillance. The first stage was a conversation I had with her in our front yards on an April Saturday morning. She was doing something with her garden border planting, what I would later recognize as the perennials. She preferred the kind that come back without much intervention, and I stopped to talk, under the pretext of being neighborly with the specific focused purpose of gathering information. Nora was, as she always had been, direct and unguarded. This was, I would eventually understand, genuine character rather than performance. She had nothing to hide from me because she did not understand that I was looking for something to find. She answered my questions about her Seattle life, about her work, about how she was settling in. When I mentioned, casually, that Diana had been spending time at her house recently, she said yes, they've been having good conversations. She's been dealing with some things, Nora said, not elaborating, not inviting elaboration, in the specific way of someone who respects another person's privacy. I filed this. The second stage was the camera footage from a Friday night in late April. Diana had told me she was at Nora's. The footage confirmed she left the house at 9:30 and didn't come home until after midnight. I had been watching the live feed from my laptop. I am aware of how this sounds, and when she came in, she looked exhausted in the specific way of someone who has been managing something heavy for a long time and is beginning to feel the weight. The third stage was the discovery I have been building toward. I accessed Diana's email. I want to be clear that this was wrong. I knew her password. She had shared it with me years ago for a specific logistical reason, and I had filed it away and never used it until this moment. I opened her account and read 2 weeks of messages and understood over approximately 90 minutes on a Saturday afternoon in late April while Diana was at work. The complete picture of what she had actually been doing. The private investigator's name was Raymond Fell. His firm was based in southeast Portland, 2 miles from our house. Diana had been working with him since February, specifically since February 9th, which was 2 weeks after a date that she had noted in the email chain as the date she had first noticed a change in my behavior at home. The email chain was thorough. Raymond Fell was, as private investigators apparently are, methodical. He had been building documentation. He had over 6 weeks compiled a record of my increased communication patterns with an individual identified in his report as IP Isabel Park that included frequency of contact, duration of calls, and the content of Slack conversations that Isabel and I had not made private, which meant they were visible on the company's network to anyone with appropriate credentials. Our IT department had apparently provided Raymond Fell with a legal copy of the relevant communications. I read my own Slack messages to Isabel transcribed in Raymond Fell's clinical professional format with the specific quality of horror reserved for seeing your own unguarded writing in an unexpected context. The messages were not explicitly romantic. They were also clearly more than professional. And seeing them transcribed without the context of the daily relationship in which they had been written, I understood immediately how they looked to someone to Diana who was reading them as evidence of what she suspected. She had been right to suspect, not in the way she feared, but she had been right that my attention had moved. The move had been real, even if its nature was different from what she had concluded. I sat with this information for a long time, then I called Isabel and told her that we needed to not talk anymore. Then I called Raymond Fell's office and asked for an appointment. Part 7. Raymond Fell. Raymond Fell was 53, precise and unhurried with the specific contained quality of a person who has seen a great deal of difficulty and has organized his relationship with it into professional distance. He received me without apparent surprise. I had not told him who I was, only that I wanted to discuss a matter, but when I said my name, his expression confirmed that he knew it. "You've read the file," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "You accessed your wife's email." "Yes," he nodded once, and not in judgment, in acknowledgement. I would come to understand a man who dealt in facts rather than moral assessments and had developed the specific discipline of someone who had learned that his judgments were not what people came to him for. "What do you want to know?" he asked. I asked him to tell me what he had told Diana. He said he could not do that. His professional obligation was to his client, but he could tell me what was in the record he had compiled since I had already accessed it through means that were my own responsibility. This distinction I recognized was his way of telling me everything without breaching his professional ethics. He had told Diana that my relationship with Isabel was emotionally close, but that he had found no evidence of physical intimacy, no hotel charges, no in-person meetings outside of the 2 company events per year at which both of us had been present. He had characterized the relationship in his professional language as an emotional drift, a pattern of investment in someone outside the marriage that, while not technically an affair, represented a significant reorientation of marital attention. This was accurate. I had known it was accurate before I read the file. I was sitting in Raymond Fell's office because I needed to hear it described accurately by someone without a stake in the description. "Did you tell her about the Nora connection?" I asked. I advised her to use Mrs. Voss as a neutral venue for our meetings. Mrs. Voss agreed to assist. She had no other role. "Did Nora know the full context?" "Mrs. Voss knew that your wife was dealing with concerns about her marriage and needed a private space for meetings. She knew nothing of the investigation's specific content." I sat with this. Nora had simply been a neighbor who had said yes when Diana needed help. The late night trips, the urgent conversations through the fence, Diana meeting with Raymond Fell at Nora's house, discussing the evidence, planning the timeline of what to do with it. What was she going to do with it? I asked. With the evidence. Raymond Fell looked at me steadily. "She hadn't decided," he said. "That was the purpose of our most recent meetings. She was trying to determine whether the evidence she had was sufficient to make a decision she wasn't sure she wanted to make." "She wasn't sure she wanted to divorce me?" I said. She wasn't sure what she wanted, he said. Those are different things. Pupa. Part 8, the confrontation. I went home from Raymond Fell's office and sat in the back office for 3 hours without opening my computer. Diana was at work. She had a 12-hour day shift that would end at 7 in the evening, and it was 2 in the afternoon, and I had 5 hours to sit with the complete picture before she came home. The complete picture was this. Diana had noticed a change in me in late January. She had been right that something had changed. The thing that had changed was not an affair in any conventional sense, but it was real. My attention had moved. My emotional availability had contracted at home in proportion to its expansion elsewhere, and she had felt this clearly enough to hire someone to investigate it. While she was building a case against me, I had been building a case against her. My case had been wrong about the facts and exactly right about the feeling. Something was off between us. A distance had developed the connection that should have been the primary relationship, and both our lives had been deprioritized in favor of, in my case, Isabel and Diana's case. The project of finding out what was wrong. We had both been right about the distance. We had both been wrong about its cause. And we had both, rather than addressing the distance directly and honestly, done everything possible to document it and defend ourselves from it, rather than close it. Nora was not an affair partner. Nora was a neighbor who had offered her kitchen table to a woman who needed a private place to sit with a private investigator. Sophie's equivalent, the person I had assigned a role in my constructed narrative that had nothing to do with her actual role in events. Isabel was not an affair. Isabel was a person I had been talking to in ways that should have been reserved for my wife, and the reason they had not been reserved for my wife was that I had stopped offering the reservation, and I had stopped offering the reservation because it felt complicated. Because the connection felt harder to maintain than a new one. Because the daily practice of intimacy with someone who already knew your failures required more courage than the easier practice of intimacy with someone who didn't know them yet. I had been a coward. The specific domestic, slow accumulating cowardice of a person who chose the easier conversation over the necessary one for long enough that the distance it created became a fact of the marriage rather than a thing that could be addressed. At 7:15, Diana's key turned in the front door. I was in the kitchen. I had made dinner partly because it was a normal evening thing and partly because I needed something to do with my hands. She came and set her bag down, turned to the kitchen, and saw me at the stove. She stopped. Something in my face, I don't know what exactly, told her that the equilibrium of the previous months had changed. "Adam," she said, "I know about Raymond Fell." I said. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 10 seconds and felt considerably longer. Then she said, "Your email." I said, "I know that was wrong. I'm telling you because I don't want to have this conversation from a position of pretending." She set her keys on the counter. She came to the kitchen table and sat down. She had the specific quality of stillness that she carried from the ER, the calm of someone who is managing something significant and has decided not to let the management become visible. "What do you know?" she asked. Everything, I said. Fell's reports, the Isabel documentation, Nora's role, when you started, why you started. She looked at her hands on the table. "Then you know I was right. About Isabel. About the distance," she said. "About something having changed." "Yes," I said. "You were right about that." She looked up. "Why didn't you tell me?" I turned the heat off under the pan. I came to the table and sat across from her. Because I didn't know how to say it without it becoming something I wasn't sure it was, and because I was ashamed. Of what? Of the fact that it was easier to talk to someone else than to you. Of the fact that I let that become a habit. I paused. I'm not having an affair with Isabel. But I was giving her things that should have been yours, and I knew it, and I kept doing it, and I didn't tell you. Diana looked at me for a long time. "I hired someone to find out what you were doing instead of asking you," she said. "Yes, that's the same thing." "Yes," I said, "it is." The dinner was getting cold on the stove. Outside, the Bancroft Street evening was doing what Portland spring evenings do, gray and damp, and the specific green smell of the city when it rains. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. The ordinary world continuing around a kitchen table where two people were trying to figure out how to speak the truth to each other. "I found the camera," Diana said. The words landed differently than anything else she had said. "When?" I asked. 3 weeks ago," she said. "It was behind the books on the third shelf. You always put things behind the books." I had no good response to this. "I didn't remove it," she said. "I thought about it. I decided that if you were watching, you'd see what there was to see me coming and going and making dinner and watching television and going to Nora's when I was trying to figure out what to do about us. I decided I was done hiding." She had known about the camera for 3 weeks and had continued going about her life in the house in front of it, not because she didn't care, but because she had decided that her life was something she was willing to be seen doing. I had been watching footage of a woman who knew she was being watched and had decided the watching did not change what was true. Part 9, what Nora said. I went to Nora's house the following Saturday. She answered the door with the easy directness she had always had, and when she saw my expression, she stepped back to let me in without asking why I was there. We sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Diana had met with Raymond Fell, and Nora poured coffee, and waited. I owe you an apology, I said. She looked at me steadily. I followed my wife here, I said, multiple times. I stood at your fence in the dark and listened to her conversations. I stopped. I thought you were part of something that you weren't part of. I know, she said. Diana told me. She told you what I thought? She told me what you thought was happening. After she found the camera. Nora held her coffee cup with both hands. She wasn't angry, if that's what you're wondering. She was sad. She said she had been doing exactly the same thing, building a story about something without enough information, and that she understood how it happened. I sat with that. What was she actually doing here? I asked. All those nights. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was trying to decide whether the marriage was over or whether it was something that could be fixed. She used my kitchen table because she didn't have anywhere else to sit with that question, where she could say it out loud without it being part of your life. A pause. Raymond Fell came here twice, not to Nora's. The other nights, she was just sitting, sometimes talking to me, sometimes not. She was sitting in your kitchen, trying to decide what to do about me. Yes, I looked at the table where my wife had sat in the evenings, not conducting an affair, not conspiring against me, but doing the thing I had been too afraid to do. Myself, sitting with the honest question of what was actually wrong between us in a space where she could look at it directly. She had been braver than me. She had been gathering information, yes, but she had been gathering information in service of a decision she was willing to make honestly when she understood what she was deciding about. I had been gathering information in service of a verdict I had already reached. She chose to stay, I said. She hadn't decided according to Fell, but she chose to come home and have the conversation rather than serve me with papers. Nora looked at me carefully. She chose to see if there was something worth staying for, she said. Those aren't the same thing. I understood the distinction. It was the most important distinction in the story. Part 10, the work. Diana and I went to couples therapy starting in May. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Lena Whitmore, who worked from an office on Hawthorne in a building full of small practices. She was calm and precise and had the specific quality of a person who had heard a great deal of difficult things and had arrived at a way of receiving difficult things that was neither comfortable nor dismissive. The first 3 sessions were largely logistics, the establishing of the facts of what had happened laid out as clearly as 2 people could lay them out, when the facts included a private investigator, a hidden camera, 6 weeks of parallel investigation, and the question of what had actually been happening between me and Isabel. Dr. Whitmore asked me in the second session to describe what the conversations with Isabel had given me that I wasn't finding in my marriage. I took a long time with this answer. Then I said, ease, the specific ease of a relationship that doesn't have any history yet, where neither person knows the other's failures, so neither person is managing around them. Dr. Whitmore asked Diana if she recognized that description from inside the marriage. Diana said yes. She said she had felt me managing around something for at least a year, but she hadn't known what, and the not knowing had made her manage in response. Careful, watchful, not sure what she was watching for. She said, we were both circling something and neither of us named it. Dr. Whitmore asked what we thought the something was. Diana said, fear. That what we had was insufficient, that it wasn't going to be enough. I said the same thing, but I converted the fear into a search for evidence that it was insufficient rather than asking whether it was. Dr. Whitmore wrote something. We went back the following week and the week after that. The work was not dramatic. It was the specific, unglamorous work of 2 people sitting in a room with a third person and saying true things to each other about their lives. And the saying being the thing that made the difference, rather than any external event. By June, we had closed the camera and the hidden files and the parallel investigation projects, and we had started talking to each other in the specific, direct way that the therapy had been calibrating us toward. Not perfectly, not all at once, but the habit was beginning. In July, Isabel left the company for another position. I wrote her a professional note of congratulations. She wrote back warmly. The conversation we had been having ended the way it should have ended, naturally, without drama, with the specific quality of something that was never going to be what either party made it in their imagination. Part 11, Nora. Nora became our friend, genuinely openly as a couple, not as Diana's secret holder or the person I had surveilled from across a fence. She came for dinner on the first Saturday in August. We sat on the back porch with the creek sound from below the garden, and Diana made her salmon pasta, which is the thing she made when she wanted to cook something that was actually good. And we talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with any of what had happened. At some point in the evening, Nora said, "Can I ask you something?" We said yes. That night when you were at my fence, she said to me, "And you heard Diana say he can't find out before we're ready?" Did you actually think she was talking about an affair? Yes, I said. For how long? About 2 months. Nora shook her head. She was talking about the timeline for the evidence. Fell had told her to wait until the pattern was complete before making any decisions. She didn't want you to discover the investigation before it was done because she thought you'd assume the worst, and she didn't know yet what the worst was. She was right, I said. You assumed the worst without the investigation, Nora said. She at least tried to find out what was actually happening before she concluded anything. This was not a comfortable observation. It was accurate. Diana looked at me across the table, not with victory or with the specific satisfaction of being vindicated with the specific patient attention that I had 6 months ago cataloged as surveillance, and that I now understood was love, the particular love of a person who has decided to pay attention to you even when paying attention is difficult. She did it better than me, I said. Diana said, "We both did it badly. We both did the wrong thing and found out the true thing by accident." Is that enough? I asked. She considered. I think she said that accidentally finding the truth is better than deliberately constructing a false version of it. Nora refilled her glass. Outside, the creek continued. Part 12. What was actually happening? I want to give you the complete picture because I have spent this entire account describing events, and I have not yet described what was actually underneath them. The distance in our marriage had started approximately 14 months before the camera, before Raymond fell, before any of the things I have described. It had started quietly, in the way that distances start not with a dramatic event, but with a slow reorientation of priorities. My work had expanded. This was real, and I had been proud of it. The product cycle I was managing was the largest of my career, and it required more of me than my previous work had, and I had given it what it required without negotiating with Diana about whether the giving was appropriate. I had simply given more, and the home had received less. And I had told myself that this was temporary and had stopped checking whether it was. Diana's work had intensified at the same time. The ER was understaffed, permanently understaffed the way ERs are, with the specific grinding quality of insufficient resources applied to essential work, and she had been absorbing extra shifts and the emotional weight of a job that asked a great deal of her even on its ordinary days. She had come home tired and given me what she had available, which was less than she would have wanted to give, and she had told herself that this was temporary and had stopped checking whether it was. We had both been giving each other the remainder of what we had rather than the best of what we had. And we had both been waiting for the other person to notice and adjust rather than noticing and adjusting ourselves. This is the thing that was actually wrong. Not Isabel, who was a symptom. Not Raymond Fell, who was a response. Not Nora, who was a neutral surface. The thing that was actually wrong was two people who loved each other and had stopped finding each other because they had gotten busy finding everything else. I am describing this carefully because I think it is the most important thing to say. We were not broken. We were neglected. There is a significant difference, and recognizing the difference is what made repair possible. Part 13, Bancroft Street in November. It is November on Bancroft Street, 14 months after the camera, 12 months after Diana hired Raymond Fell, 10 months after the confrontation in the kitchen. Diana is at work, a day shift, back by 7. I am in the back office working on the product cycle that is now in its 3rd year and has become the most significant professional relationship of my work life. My communication with my team is by any objective measure the same as it has always been. What is different is what is not there, or rather what is not missing. The space that was available for Isabel to occupy the space that should have been occupied differently all along has been closed. Not by decision, exactly. By use. By Diana and I using it the actual daily practice of talking to each other about the things that are on our minds, the things we are managing, the fears that are accumulating. The unsexy work of maintaining a marriage which requires exactly the kind of sustained daily attention that I had been directing elsewhere and had not been directing here. Nora is coming for dinner on Saturday. She is bringing her current boyfriend, a civil engineer named Marcus, who she met at a work conference in October, and who we have not yet met, but who she describes with the careful understatement of someone who is trying not to oversell something she is privately excited about. Diana and I are going to the coast for Thanksgiving weekend, a rental cabin in Cannon Beach that she found in October and that I had said yes to immediately without hesitation, without checking whether work would allow it or whether there was a better option. Just yes immediately without negotiating the terms. The camera is gone. The files from Raymond Fell's investigation are deleted. Diana deleted them in therapy in Dr. Whitmore's office in a session where we both agreed that keeping documentation of each other's failures was not compatible with building the marriage we wanted. The Slack conversations with Isabel are gone. She is at a company in Chicago now. We are not in contact. The house on Bancroft Street is still the house we intended to have when we bought it 6 years ago. The rhododendrons are getting their fall color. The creek at the bottom of the garden makes the sound it always makes. The porch light is on in the evenings because Diana asked me to put it on timer, and I did. I am not going to tell you that the story ends with perfect resolution. The specific work of a marriage is not the kind that ends. It is the kind that continues daily in the form of the choices you make about what to pay attention to and whether to tell the truth about what you see. What I will tell you is that I paid attention to the wrong things for a long time. That Diana and I were both conducting parallel investigations into the distance between us rather than having the conversation that was the only actual solution to the distance. That we found our way to that conversation by accident and by the hard work of several months after the accident. And that the conversation when we finally had it was not as frightening as either of us had believed it would be. The fear of the conversation had been the distance. The conversation itself was just two people at a kitchen table saying true things. That is what had been available the whole time. That is all it ever takes and all it ever requires. That is in the end what we both already knew and needed to remember. The porch light is on. Diana's car will be in the driveway by 7. I am going to be in the kitchen when she gets home. That is the story. That is all of it. The end. Cast of characters: Adam Carver, product manager, 41 Bancroft Street. Spent 6 weeks building a case against his wife, while his wife spent 6 weeks building a case against him. Got it wrong about the facts and right about the feeling. Working on it. Diana Carver, ER nurse, 38. Hired a private investigator to understand what was happening in her marriage rather than confronting it directly. Found the camera 3 weeks before Adam thought she did. Decided to stay before the confrontation. Was the braver one. Nora Voss, neighbor, 32. Offered her kitchen table to a woman who needed a private place to ask a hard question. Was not having an affair with Diana. Was not part of anyone's conspiracy. Just a good neighbor. Will bring Marcus to dinner on Saturday. Raymond Fell, private investigator, 53. Methodical, precise professional. Documented an emotional drift, did not manufacture it. Did his job correctly. Isabel Park, senior designer, 35, Chicago now, was not having an affair with Adam, was receiving things that belonged to his marriage, did not ask for them, is not responsible for what Adam chose to offer. Dr. Lena Whitmore, couples therapist, Hawthorne Boulevard, does not find things comfortable that should not be comfortable. Ask the correct questions. Marcus, civil engineer. Nora's boyfriend, yet to be met. The future presenting itself at dinner on Saturday. Part 14, the history of the distance. I want to go back further because I think the distance had roots that neither Diana nor I had fully traced, and understanding the roots is the only way the story makes complete sense. Diana and I had met at a friend's birthday party in Portland's Pearl District 8 years before the camera. She had been 29, I had been 32, and we had spent 4 hours at the corner of the party talking with the specific focus quality of two people who have found, in the general company of other people, the one person worth talking to. I had told her about the product work, which was at that point in its early days at a startup that would eventually be acquired. She had told me about the ER, about the specific rhythm of emergency medicine and what it required and what it gave back. We had recognized something in each other immediately. What I recognized in her was precision. The specific way she thought through problems, starting with the available facts and building toward conclusions rather than starting with conclusions and finding facts to support them. She was not impulsive. She was not easily frightened. She had developed through years of emergency work. The specific quality of someone who could be trusted to make correct decisions under significant pressure. What she recognized in me, she told me much later, was something more specific and more flattering. She said I was the first person she had dated who listened to what she actually said rather than what he expected to hear. She said most of the men she had been with had a model of her in their heads that was more important to them than she was, and that she could tell from the beginning that I was working with her rather than the model. I held on to this for a long time. Years later, in Dr. Whitmore's office, I brought it up and Diana said, "You used to listen that way. I don't know when it changed." I don't know exactly when it changed either. What I know is that it changed gradually in the way that attention changes when it is being directed elsewhere, not in a single moment, but in a slow reorientation. The compass needle swinging towards something and the old direction becoming the default rather than the chosen. The product work expanded. The startup was acquired, and I joined the acquiring company as a senior manager, and the scope of my responsibility increased significantly. I was not, in any objective sense, a bad husband during this period. I was present at meals. I remembered anniversaries. I asked Diana about her work and listened to the answers. What I did not do, what I see now from the outside. As the specific failure of these years was bringing myself to the marriage. The self that was afraid, that was uncertain, that was managing and expanding professional responsibility and finding it harder than it appeared and wanting to tell someone about that. I brought Diana the version of myself that had its act together. I saved the version that didn't for the home office where it operated on Slack and in video calls, in a context where the stakes were professional rather than intimate. Diana was doing something parallel and different. She was increasingly managing the emotional weight of the ER in silence, not because I wouldn't have listened, but because the listening felt to her like a burden. She was adding to someone who was already managing a great deal. She had developed the specific habit of emergency nurses, which is to absorb and process rather than distribute. And she brought that habit home and applied it to me and to our marriage and to the accumulating weight of maintaining the domestic life of two busy people. We had been carrying our respective weights separately in the same house for approximately 2 years before January and the phone and the beginning of the end of the period of not saying anything. Part 15, Isabel Fully. I owe you the complete account of Isabel because I have described her in the story, but I have not described what was actually happening between us, and the complete account is necessary. Isabel Park joined the company in the same reorganization that expanded my scope, and our teams were immediately entangled by the nature of the product cycle we were both working on. The first several months of our collaboration were purely professional, efficient, mutually respectful. The specific working relationship that develops when two capable people find each other's working style compatible. The shift happened in November, 2 months before January. We were working late on a product milestone, the collaboration extended into the evening in Pacific Standard Time, and she made a joke about something in a design file that was, for reasons I cannot fully explain, exactly the kind of thing that would have been funny to Diana. The kind of specific dry, precision-dependent humor that required knowing something real about the thing you were making fun of. I said so. I said that's the kind of joke my wife would make. Isabel said she sounds interesting. I said she is. And then instead of continuing the product conversation, I started talking about Diana. Not the bad version. I was not at that point in the bad version. I talked about who she was, about the ER work, about the quality of attention she brought to things, about the specific way she could walk into a room and immediately read what the room needed. I talked about her for 20 minutes in a way that I had not talked about her to anyone in at least a year, possibly longer. When I finished, Isabel said, "You should probably tell her what you just told me." I said, "You're right." I did not tell Diana. The conversations with Isabel continued. What they became was not what they should have been. They became the place where I said the things I was not saying at home, not the bad things, not the grievances and frustrations, but the good things, the observations and the feelings and the quality of my actual internal life. I was more honest with Isabel in 3 months of professional conversation than I had been with Diana in the previous year, and this is the precise measure of what was wrong. I had stopped offering Diana access to my actual experience. I had been giving her the managed version, the version that was on top of things, and I had been directing the unmanaged version, the honest version, towards someone who had no obligation to receive it, and who I think would have sent it back to Diana if she had understood that's where it belonged. When I ended the conversations in June, Isabel did not ask why. She seemed to understand in the quiet way of someone who had understood for some time that the conversations had been borrowed from somewhere they belonged. She said she hoped things were okay. I said they were getting there. She said that was good, and that was all. Part 16, Diana's account. I want to give you Diana's account of the same period because I eventually heard it and it is different from mine, and the difference is the whole story. Diana noticed the change in January. This is accurate, but the change she noticed was not the one I would have described. She did not first notice the phone habits or the Isabel conversations. She noticed a change in how I looked at her. She said in Dr. Whitmore's office in the 5th session, "You stopped being curious about me. I would come home from work and tell you something real, something difficult, a patient situation, or a department issue, and you would respond correctly. You would say the right things, but you weren't curious. You had stopped wondering what I thought about what I was describing. You were receiving information and responding to it, and that was all." Dr. Whitmore asked her how long this had been happening. Diana said about a year and a half, but it got worse in November. In November, there was something specifically absent that I couldn't name. And then in January, I realized the thing that was absent was the thing I could see on your face when you were on work calls. You were curious there. You were the person I married engaged and interested and working hard to understand. And I wasn't getting that? Dr. Whitmore asked me if I recognized this. I said yes, I recognized it completely. Diana said, I wasn't looking for an affair, or not only. I told Raymond that I needed to understand what was pulling your attention, where it was going. I told him I needed to know whether it was a person or a thing or something about the work, and whether it was something that could be addressed or something that meant the marriage was over. And he found Isabel, I said. He found the pattern, Diana said. Not what it meant exactly. Just that there was a significant amount of communication that was different in quality from professional communication. And that the timing corresponded to when I started noticing the change. She had been right. About the timing, about the quality of the communication, about the fundamental fact that my attention had been divided in a way that damaged us. She had been wrong about what it was. She had been afraid it was a physical affair, which it was not. But she had been completely right about the thing beneath the thing, which was the absence of the curiosity that had been the foundation of what we had. You described it exactly right, I said to her in that session. When you said I had stopped being curious about you, that is exactly what had happened. Why? She asked, not with anger, with the specific quality of a question that is asking for information rather than assigning blame. I thought about it for a long time. Dr. Whitmore waited. Because being curious about you requires being present, I said, and being present with you means being present with someone who knows me. And someone who knows me can see whether what I'm doing is what I said I was going to do. And I was afraid that what I was doing wasn't good enough and I didn't want to be seen doing it. Diana looked at me. You were afraid I would find you insufficient, she said. Yes, the same thing I was afraid of, she said. We had been afraid of the same thing. We had been managing the fear in different directions, and the management had created the distance, and the distance had created more fear, and the fear had created more management. That was the whole story. Part 17, The Creek. The creek at the bottom of the Bancroft Street Garden is called Tacoma Creek. It runs year-round, though, at different volumes, full and fast, in the wet months, slow and shallow in August when the rains have stopped. I have been in the habit since we moved to the house of walking down to it in the evenings when the weather allows, not for any particular reason, just because water moving over stones makes a sound that I find useful for thinking. I started going more regularly in the months after the confrontation, April through July. The long recovery period when Diana and I were in therapy and doing the work of rebuilding something that had not been destroyed so much as abandoned. I would stand at the edge of the creek, usually after dinner, and I would think about what I had done and what I was doing and what the difference was between them. Here's what I thought about most often: the camera. Not the camera itself, the decision to install it. The specific moment when I chose, rather than having a conversation that I was afraid to have, to install a device that would allow me to observe my wife without her knowledge. I had told myself the camera was about truth finding. What it was actually about was avoiding the conversation that would have required me to be vulnerable to the truth, because the truth that something between us was broken, and that the breaking was at least partly my responsibility, was frightening, and I had chosen surveillance over vulnerability. Diana had made a different version of the same choice. She had hired Raymond Fell rather than asking me directly. Her version was more methodical, more professional in its execution, and she had ultimately been trying to understand rather than simply confirm the distinction between her investigation and mine was precisely the distinction she named in that therapy session. She had been building toward a decision she was willing to make honestly, and I had been building toward a verdict I had already reached. But the core of both choices was the same. We had been afraid to speak the truth to each other, so we had tried to find it by other means, and the finding had cost us both a great deal more than the speaking would have. The creek did not care about any of this. The creek continued. In May, it was still high from the spring rains. By July, it had slowed to its summer patience. In November, when this account ends, it is running again, the first fall rains having come through in October, filling it back to its usual volume, the sound carrying up the garden in the evenings. Diana and I both go to the creek now, sometimes together, sometimes separately. It has become the kind of place that belongs to both of us, without needing to belong to either of us specifically, the way the house became eventually. Actually, the house we intended to have, not because we made it so by design, but because we made it so by the daily small choices to be honest with each other about what we were experiencing in it. That is the work. It is small and it is daily and it does not look like anything from the outside. From the outside, it looks like two people living in a house on a quiet street in Portland, going to the farmer's market on Saturdays, having a neighbor over for dinner. From the inside, it is the whole thing. Part 18, What We Owe Each Other. There is a conversation I have not told you about because it happened late in the process, October, a month before this account ends, and I was not sure until recently whether it belonged in the story. We were on the coast. Cannon Beach, the rental cabin we had booked in October. It was a Saturday evening and we had cooked dinner in the small kitchen of the cabin, and we were on the covered porch looking out at the Pacific, which was doing what the Pacific does in October, dark and serious and entirely indifferent to whatever was happening on land. Diana said, "I want to tell you something." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I was going to leave in April. I had been thinking about it since March. I had the paperwork from Raymond. I had enough. I had made an appointment with an attorney." I did not say anything. She said, "And then I found the camera, and I sat with that for 2 weeks knowing you were watching, and I realized something."
What?
That you were watching because you were afraid of losing me, not because you didn't care. Because you cared and you didn't know how to say it, and instead of saying it, you installed a camera in the living room to try to figure out what was happening. "That's not a reasonable response to the situation," I said. "No," she said, "but it's a human one, and it's what made me cancel the attorney appointment." She looked at the ocean. "I thought if he installed that camera, he hasn't given up. He's still trying to find out what's happening, even if he's trying in exactly the wrong way. And I want to find out what's happening too. And we should probably do that together rather than by trying to surveil each other in parallel." I looked at my wife on the porch of the cabin in the October dark. "You could have told me about the camera," I said. "I know, but I needed to sit with it for a while. I needed to know that what I had seen was what I thought I had seen." "Which was someone who was afraid," she said. "Someone who was making bad choices because they were afraid. The same thing I was doing. The same thing we were both doing." The Pacific continued. The cabin was warm behind us through the open door. We sat with the story for a while, the complete version of it, the version that included both of our failures in their correct positions. Then Diana said, "I want to tell you something else." I said, "Tell me." She said, "I'm glad I stayed." I looked at her. "Not because everything is fixed," she said, "because it's being fixed. Because we're doing the work, and because I would rather be doing the work with you than not doing it." I said, "I'm glad you stayed too." We were quiet for a while longer after that, and the ocean was doing its thing and the cabin was warm, and we were, for the first time in a long time, in exactly the same place. That is the story. That is all of it. The porch light on Bancroft Street is on a timer now. Diana's car will be in the driveway by 7. The creek at the bottom of the garden is running. The rhododendrons are getting their fall color. We are still here. We are both paying attention. That is enough. That will always be enough. That is the beginning and the end of it. Begin. Part 19, the letter I didn't send. In June, 2 months after the confrontation, I wrote Diana a letter. I did not send it. What I did instead was bring it to Dr. Whitmore's office and read it out loud in a session which was Dr. Whitmore's suggestion when I told her I had written it and wasn't sure what to do with it. She said read it to her. I said that seemed more vulnerable than I was prepared for. She said that was probably why it was the right thing to do. I am going to reproduce it here in abbreviated form because I think it says some things about the 6 months that I have been describing in more deliberate language, and the less deliberate version contains things that the deliberate one omits. The letter said, "I know I installed a camera in the living room. I know this is one of the worst things I have done in this marriage and possibly in my adult life, and I don't have a justification for it that holds up. What I have is an explanation which is not the same thing. I was afraid. I have been afraid for at least 2 years in the specific way that people are afraid when they don't know how to name what they're afraid of, and so they identify it as something external and try to solve the external thing when the actual thing is inside them and has been there the whole time. What I was afraid of was this, that I was not enough for you. That the version of me who showed up in this house every day was insufficient. that you were looking at me and finding me lacking in ways I couldn't see, and that the only rational response to that fear was to look harder at you rather than asking whether the fear was accurate. The fear was not accurate. You were not looking at me and finding me lacking. You were looking at me and finding me absent, which is different, and which I had created by directing my availability toward a context where the cost of being present was lower. I don't say this as an accusation of you. I say it as a description of what I did and why I did it in as honest a form as I can find. I want to still be married to you, not because I can't imagine not being married to you. I can imagine it, and it is the specific kind of unimaginable that you experience by imagining it, and understanding that the imagining is wrong in some fundamental way. Not because I am afraid of what the alternative looks like, because you are the person I wanted to be married to when I was 32 at the corner of a party in the Pearl District, and I have not stopped wanting that. I just stopped saying it. I should have said it. I am saying it now. Diana listened to this without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." Dr. Whitmore asked her what she knew. Diana said, "I know he was afraid. I've known for a long time. I was waiting for him to say it instead of doing something about it, and when he didn't say it, I did something about it too. We were both waiting for the other person to go first." Dr. Whitmore asked, "What would going first have looked like?" Diana said, "Saying I'm scared we're losing each other. Are you scared too?" She looked at me. "Are you scared?" I asked. She said I was. I am less scared now. "Why?" "Because you told the truth," she said. "Eventually, badly in the wrong order through a camera and a private investigator. But you told the truth." I took the letter home and kept it. Not because it was good writing, because it was the first honest thing I had put on paper about the marriage in 2 years. And honesty, even when it arrives badly and late, deserves to be kept somewhere. Part 20 Bancroft Street in November final. The porch light comes on at 5:30 now. The days are short in Portland in November. Dark by 4:30, the specific relentless gray of the Pacific Northwest winter settling in for its 4-month residency. Diana is on a day shift. She will be home by 7. I am in the back office, finishing the last items of the product cycle that has been the primary professional fact of my life for 3 years, and that is in its final stage, nearly complete. Nora texted this morning about Saturday dinner. She is bringing Marcus. She said he is nervous about meeting us, which she has told him is unnecessary. I wrote back, he should bring dessert. It establishes a role. She sent a laughing emoji. The creek is running. I went down at lunch with my coffee and stood at the edge for 10 minutes in the wet cold and listened to it and thought about the year that has passed and the year before it and whether the accounting is a positive one. Here's what I think the year was necessary. The things we did, the camera, the investigator, the parallel surveillance operations, running in the same house by 2 people who were afraid of the same thing, were not good. They were also the path we took to the conversation that was the only actual solution. A more courageous version of us would have had the conversation in February of the year before any of this happened. We were not that version. We became a version that found the conversation by accident by the collision of 2 wrong approaches to the same real problem. The problem was real. The solutions we tried were wrong. The real solution was the one we found at the end, not through documentation or evidence or surveillance, but through 2 people at a kitchen table saying true things. That is the story's whole meaning, and I am aware that it is not a complicated meaning. The complicated thing was the path to it, the 6 weeks of parallel investigation, the hidden camera, the private investigator on Division Street, the conversations with Isabel that were borrowed from their correct address. None of that was necessary. All of it was how we got here. Diana's key in the front door. I close the laptop. I go to the kitchen. The dinner I have made is the salmon pasta Diana's recipe, which I learned in July and have been making on days I finish work before she comes home in the specific small way that a person who has been paying better attention continues to pay it. She comes in, she sets down her bag, she turns to the kitchen, she sees me at the stove. She says, "It smells good." I say, "Salmon pasta, your recipe." She comes to the kitchen and stands beside me at the stove and looks at what I am doing. "You got the garlic ratio right this time?" she says. "I measured," I say. She looks at me with the expression I have been cataloging wrong for 2 years, the one I called watchful and suspicious and calculating, and that I now understand is simply her paying attention. She is paying attention to me the way she has been paying attention to me since the party in the Pearl District 8 years ago. In the specific way of a person who is working with you, rather than a model of you. I am trying to be worth the attention. That is the whole job. That is the only job. The dinner is almost ready. Nora will be here Saturday with Marcus. The creek is running at the bottom of the garden. The porch light is on. We are both still here. We are both paying attention. That will always be enough. That is all. One more thing. There is a photograph in our kitchen that we have had since year 2 of living in the Bancroft Street house. Diana brought it from her apartment when we moved in together, a print of a photograph she had taken on a trip to the Oregon coast with friends before we met the horizon line of the Pacific at dusk, the light doing the specific thing Pacific light does at dusk, all gold and gray and the water holding both at once. I have walked past this photograph probably 3,000 times in 6 years without looking at it closely. In August, I looked at it closely for the first time. What I noticed was that the photograph is not of the ocean. Not primarily. The ocean is the background. What the photograph is actually of is the horizon line itself, the specific meeting point of water and sky, the place where two separate things become one thing. Diana had framed the shot so that the line bisects the image almost exactly at the center. Two equal halves. Neither more important than the other. The composition is about the meeting. I asked Diana when she had taken it. She said, I was 30, the summer before I started at OHSU. I went with 3 friends and we spent 2 days on the coast and I took maybe 400 photographs and this was the only one I kept. Why this one? She looked at the photograph. She said, because it's the only one where the two things are the same size. I was always trying to take the dramatic wave or the interesting rock formation. This one, I just pointed the camera at the middle of the view, where the two things met. She had kept a photograph of a meeting. We have been, I think, in the business of meeting for 8 years badly, sometimes, and in the past 14 months, with the specific intentionality of two people who understand that the meeting is the whole point, and that it requires showing up, which is not the same as being present, which is not the same as being honest, but which is the first of the 3 requirements, and therefore the one that makes the others possible. I am showing up. That is where I am. That is where we both are. The photograph is still in the kitchen, the horizon line is still at the center, the two halves are still equal, the light at dusk is still doing its thing. Begin. The salmon pasta is ready, the porch light is on, Diana is home. The distance between us is tonight nothing at all. That is the ending. That is the only ending worth having. The creek is running, the rhododendrons are getting their November color, we are still on Bancroft Street, we are still here. Begin.